To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text the long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever!
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just $95, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
Hello and welcome to 31 Days of Terror 2024, and we are on day number 13, and I have 2 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from September the 4th, 2024, and story number 1 comes from Eve. My grandpa died about 10 years ago when I was around 10. He was a kind man. I was so lucky to have so many wonderful memories of him as a child. He was fun and always had time to play with us. He absolutely loved children. In 2020, I had my first child. I had been in hospital for a week waiting to be induced due to some complications. I didn't know when I was going to be induced. I just had to wait until my name was called. It was also the middle of the pandemic. I couldn't have visitors, and I had been told my husband would only be allowed in when I was in active labour, aka literally about to give birth. The only control it felt like we had in the midst of a pandemic was whether we found out what gender our baby was going to be. We agonised over this but decided not to. The night before I gave birth, I had no idea I was going to be induced and give birth the next day. I had a dream. I say dream, but it felt and still does feel like real life. I was in hospital in my room, holding a baby girl. I could see her face, all her features. She was purple in colour. She had a mark on her head and bruises on her cheeks. Her head was cone-shaped, but I knew somehow she was fine and well. Next to me, sitting there, was my grandpa. He took the baby from me, held her, talking to her, and we spent what felt like hours together. The next day I was woken up and taken to be induced. I was in labour alone for 6 hours before my partner was allowed in. The first thing I told him was this baby was going to be a girl. He assumed the doctors had told me. I explained about the dream. He nodded along, probably blaming it on the brain of someone who's been alone in a hospital room for a week and then 6 hours of labour alone. Towards the end of my birth, things started to go wrong. I was hemorrhaging and the baby was stuck. They had to use forceps and a vacuum to help me birth. Throughout the whole traumatic experience, I wasn't scared. I knew this baby was going to be born, I knew she was going to be a girl, and I knew she was going to be fine. My husband still says he can't believe how unfazed I was, as what felt like hell was breaking loose around us. The baby was born, a little girl. As I held her, I knew that I had met her the night before. She was purple. Her head was cone-shaped from the vacuums, there was a mark on her head and bruises on her cheeks. It was exactly as I had seen. I also had this unmovable feeling that my grandpa had met her. When eventually my nana, my grandpa's widow, was able to hold my daughter, she said, "She has been here before." Fast forward 1 year or so, and we had moved house, and I finally put up some family photos. We'd never had any up before. I put up a photo of my grandpa. My little girl pointed up at the photo and said, clear as day, "Henry," my grandpa's name. It was still COVID, and my daughter had spent the first year of her life at home, with just her parents under lockdown. She had never been to my nana's house, the only place there were still pictures of my grandpa. It might be silly. but I believe she knew him from the night we spent together before she was born. I tell you what, this is far from silly. You know, based on the stories we've had over the years, Eve, this is far from silly, and it is far from a silly assumption. We've had kids who've been like, listen, I was just floating around up there waiting for you guys to be ready for me to come to Earth, you know, whatever that means. Or they're like, yeah, you know, Granddad comes into my room every night and reads me a bedtime story, and Granddad's been dead for years. So it's not silly at all. I always feel the need to preface any labour and birth talk by saying, you know, I don't have kids, okay? I don't know what it's like to be pregnant. I don't know what it's like to be in labour. I don't know what it's like to give birth. One time I made a joke on Twitter, which I still think was very funny, where I compared breaking in new Doc Martens to giving birth, because I said breaking in new Doc Martens must be what it's like to give birth. Horrifically painful, but the result is so beautiful that you forget and get a new pair of Doc Martens and do it all again, just like you do with kids, you know, horrifically painful, but you forget how terrible it was, and then you go on and have more kids, right? It was a good joke, okay? And I even caveated it by saying, this is a joke, I don't have kids, I don't know what it's like to give birth, you know, and I still got roasted on Twitter. This woman was like, you're comparing breaking in Doc Martens to giving birth? Oh, sweetie. So if I say flippant or, you know, silly things about childbirth, I am joking, and no, I do not know what it's like. My sister, however, did go into labour during lockdown, and similar to you, Eve, she, you know, went in and was on her own until she was in active labour, you know, literally about to give birth. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like, how did you do that? And I know women have to do it all the time. Like, women are amazing. I wonder if that like really strong bond that you had with your granddad, that, you know, this was a really pivotal moment in your life. You were in hospital for a week on your own at a really big moment for you. You know, you're just waiting to give birth, not knowing when it's going to happen, not knowing how it's going to happen. And you're doing it on your own until the kind of, you know, the last minutes when the baby is actually about to arrive. And that is, I can't even imagine what that felt like. And maybe your granddad was like, I need to get here beforehand and make her know that everything is going to be all right. And look, things go wrong in births all the time, right? And I can't even imagine if you are giving birth and you're hemorrhaging, baby's stuck, whatever happens. I can't even imagine what that fear would feel like, right? Because you're thinking, I don't know what's going to happen here. If your granddad hadn't showed up the night before and been like, listen, she's going to come out and she's going to be battered and bruised, all right, because it's going to be a rough ride. If that hadn't happened, you'd probably have spent that period of the birth absolutely petrified, because you'd be thinking this is all going to go wrong, right? But because your granddad had been there the night before, showed you this baby, at least you're able to go, listen, I know this works out. I know this is going to be okay. I've seen her. I know what she's going to look like. And I love that this tiny baby then, you know, a year later says granddad's name, says Henry. I think probably she has more of a connection with your granddad than you ever could have anticipated. And I think that is just an incredibly beautiful thing.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
Imagine relying on a dozen different software programs to run your business, none of which are connected, and each one more expensive and more complicated than the last. It can be pretty stressful. Now, imagine Odoo. Odoo has all the programs you'll ever need, and they're all connected on one platform. Doesn't Odoo sound amazing? Let Odoo harmonize your business with simple, efficient software that can handle everything for a fraction of the price. Sign up today at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just 95 bucks, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.
And story number 2 comes from Laura. When I was 11, my family moved into a fairly new build house, maybe 20 or 30 years old. Nothing old or freaky looking. However, we all soon realised that not looking haunted doesn't mean anything. My sister and I are only half-sisters, and as such she often spent days at a time at her dad's house. She is an older sibling and we had a bit of an age gap, 8 years. So in order to keep her Clinique makeup free from my grubby hands, she had a lock on her door. Mum did have a spare key, but that was purely for emergencies. It's worth mentioning my sister also had the freakiest habit of all time that I will never understand. She collected pot dolls, specifically baby ones. They absolutely terrified me, and I'm not sure if it was an actual interest or just an added protection so I didn't steal her things. Anyway, when I was in my first year of secondary school, I came in from school and ran straight upstairs to use the loo. I heard my sister shout, "Laura!" from inside her room. I shouted back that I would be 1 minute, and while I washed my hands, I heard her repeat more insistently, "Laura!" I repeated I'd be 1 second and walked towards her bedroom. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I assumed she had gone downstairs, so I did the same. Mum was in the kitchen making our tea, and I asked her where my sister was because she was doing my head in shouting at me. Mum looked confused. My sister had left for her dad's house that morning and wasn't returning for a few days. I know what I heard and was really freaked out. It's worth noting that I don't come from a family where your parents say things aren't real. My mum and I are very sensitive with spirits and are very intuitive in general, usually getting strange feelings or predictions when bad things are going to happen. That night I went upstairs to bed. My covers were crinkled and I tried to remember if I'd made it that morning. I probably hadn't. We had no pets at this time. I lifted the covers back and saw one of my sister's porcelain dolls laid there staring up at me. I screamed and ran to my mum's room. I could tell immediately she hadn't done this, and my sister had set off to her dad's before I had gone to school, so there was no way she had done this. The house I mentioned was creaky. Too creaky for its age, really. Also very dark. No matter how bright the bulbs were or how many lamps there were, the upstairs never seemed to brighten up. It's one of the reasons I hated using the loo in the evening. Walking through the upstairs hallway was terrifying. Floorboards would creak as though something was following you. Even at 3 a.m. I had to put all the lights on if I needed the loo. My parents hated this and used to shout at me because apparently it made our house look like Blackpool illuminations. They soon put a stop to it. One night in particular, I woke up and went into the loo at 3 a.m. The floorboards were creaking as usual, but this time the creaking echoed as though someone else was also walking behind me. I had this sinking feeling that someone was behind me. And maybe it was because I was half asleep. Maybe it's because I'm a scaredy cat, but I swear I saw the outline of a woman. I ran back to my room and waited until sunrise to use the loo. It was only years later my sister visited a very trusted by our family spiritual medium. We were told there was a little girl named Lily who followed her, who really liked her dolls. I joked, "Did she mention anything about anyone else creepy upstairs?" My sister went grey but casually said, "No, but I used to see that woman walking around too, and so did Mum." I had never mentioned this to anyone. This is my freakiest and earliest story. I get goosebumps thinking of it now, even 26 years later. In the house where I lived as a small child, my sister and I shared a room. We had bunk beds, and I had the top bunk. I was around 5. My sister was 13, so well into secondary school. In a winter morning, it used to be really dark when she got up to get dressed. It always felt like nighttime, even though it was probably around 6 or 7 in the morning. One day, when I had just woken, I saw and heard my sister moving clothes hangers to the side in the wardrobe. It was blurry, but you can't mistake that sound. I asked my sister to put the light on as I wanted to go get a drink. Which is when my sister got up off the bottom bunk and whatever was in my wardrobe turned around and grinned at me before vanishing. I cried my eyes out. When my sister asked why I was upset, I couldn't begin to communicate what had happened or why everything in that room felt evil. It was made even worse when my sister said, "It's okay, I see her too sometimes." Now this house terrified me in general. We moved in just before I turned 5. I was potty trained for years by this point, but I used to have accidents because I was far too scared to go upstairs on my own. I used to fall asleep on the sofa on purpose, hoping my parents would let me stay there and not make me go upstairs alone. It was so frightening in general. Even guests used to remark on the bad feelings they had going in. Oh, Laura, these stories have given me the heebie-jeebies, to be honest. I love the anti-little sister lock that your sister had on the door, because I find that very funny. Being a little sister, I find that hilarious. And again, we've got some sort of mimicry going on, right? So whatever it is calling you from inside the bedroom. Is it this little girl, Lily, who has realised that this is a way to get your attention? Rather than this being something malevolent or evil, this is something that is just trying to get your attention and doing it in the only way that it knows how, which is a little girl mimicking your big sister calling you. And maybe that's why the little pot doll was in your bed. I had to look up what a pot doll was. I think they're just little porcelain dolls, basically. That's what I can gather from what a pot doll is. So maybe this little girl was just trying to connect with you, being like silly and fun and putting a little pot doll in your bed, being like, "Oh, hello, I'm here and this is a cute thing that we can connect over and play with." Either that or that freaky little porcelain doll thing unlocked the door, crawled to your room, climbed up the bed and into the bed. I know which one I'd prefer. And I understand why people think dolls are freaky. Like, I do get it. I understand it. But I don't think I'd ever really be frightened of them. Like, I could fight a doll, to be honest. I could fight a doll and win, I think. And I guess the story about the woman, being behind you when you were walking to the toilet, you could have absolutely dismissed that as being like, oh, it's just my overactive imagination. I just was, on edge. Maybe I woke up from a nightmare I didn't even realise I was having, and maybe when I was going to the toilet, I was still in that kind of half asleep state. Like, fine, right? You could kind of write it off and be like, oh, it's a weird thing that happened, but it was probably just me. And then for your sister years later to be like, oh yeah, me and mum used to see that woman walking around too. Shut up. I mean, thanks for the validation, but also no thanks for the validation. I was happy just believing that was a dream. And to be clear, because I did go back and check, the earliest story, so your freakiest and earliest story about whatever the heck that was in the wardrobe turning and smiling at you, was prior to moving into this house. So it was back when you were littler, you were around 5 years old. And it is a very distinctive sound. Somebody, sliding hangers in a wardrobe, you'd immediately know what that sound was. And then seeing something and thinking, oh, it's okay, it's my sister, she's obviously sorting out her stuff for school, and then realising that it wasn't her, but this thing turning around and smiling at you before it vanished. I'd love to know more about what it looked like. Like, did it look like your sister? Or a version of your sister? Or did it look like something else? Was it just an entity and you sort of could see that it was grinning or could feel that it was grinning? And again, with the sister being like, it's okay, I see her too sometimes. Oh, we don't need that. Like, we love the validation, but sometimes not. Thank you so much for listening to day number 13 of 31 Days of Terror 2024. Thank you so much to Eve and Laura for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story came from September the 4th, 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Need new glasses or want a fresh new style? Warby Parker has you covered. Glasses start at just 95 bucks, including anti-reflective, scratch-resistant prescription lenses that block 100% of UV rays. Every frame's designed in-house with a huge selection of styles for every face shape. And with Warby Parker's free home try-on program, you can order 5 pairs to try at home for free. Shipping is free both ways, too. Go to warbyparker.com/covered to try 5 pairs of frames at home for free. warbyparker.com/covered.